Welcome back to Tiny Blue Games. My name's of course Csaw or Chris, and today we're talking about Final Fantasy XIV in 2020. Now, this is a video that I've been waiting to do for quite some time, and more than anything, I know it's a video that you guys have been waiting for me to do. This is my, I don't want to say summary, but my recap of the Realm Reborn story, and my thoughts about Final Fantasy XIV as a new player. Now, for people who haven't been along with us for this very, very long journey, I started playing Final Fantasy XIV for the first time about 10 months ago. And not only was it my first time playing Final Fantasy XIV, but it was also the first time I've ever played a Final Fantasy game at all. So I really didn't know too much about the franchise or anything really to do with the world, and for a long time, that was one of the biggest barriers that prevented me from joining, is that I felt like, as someone who knew nothing about the franchise, knew nothing about, the existing world, that I wouldn't enjoy it as much, that I wouldn't be as welcomed. And well, I was very wrong about all of that. With all that said, if you are a brand new player who is thinking about getting into Final Fantasy XIV and you don't want anything spoiled for you, you should probably be aware that I'm going to talk about some pretty major story steps in this video. That being said, if you're someone who's looking for a summary, this isn't a summary, because number one, I'm probably going to make mistakes. Number two, I'm definitely going to make mistakes when saying people's names. I apologize to everyone who's going to be offended by that. And number three, there are better summaries all out on YouTube that you can look. There's a lot of people who've done this better than me. This is going to be moments that I felt had an impact on my new player journey, moments I liked, moments I didn't like, because this isn't a biased video either. There are some definite issues with the Realm Reborn story, some issues that are probably going to be resolved when it gets condensed in a future patch, but nonetheless, things that did impact my new player journey and things that should be shared. So we're going to talk about all of that right now. Here we go. So to set the stage, I joined Final Fantasy XIV in kind of a weird time for me in terms of MMOs in general. I've was bouncing around between MMOs, not really sure what to play. I played a fair bit of Guild Wars 2. I played some World of Warcraft on and off again. But more importantly, I had recently lost WildStar, which, if you don't know, it's a MMO that shut down a few years ago. And I lost that recently, and I didn't really have a place to call home. I also didn't have really a community for my YouTube channel, as I was doing kind of a playthrough through WildStar up until it shut down as well. So it was a pretty strange place for me, and I was making a lot of first impression videos of a lot of different MMOs, and I did one for Final Fantasy XIV because, hey, they have an awesome free trial, and if you're considering the game, I would definitely give it a shot, because that's what I tried, and it convinced me to dive into the game. But it wasn't just the game itself that won me over, it was the community as a whole. When I dove into the game, people were welcoming. They were loving, nurturing, they encouraged new players. Don't get me wrong, there are trolls that will be in any game, but there was so many good people. It was really refreshing. And then I started posting content for the game, and that's when I was truly blown away. The amount of people online on YouTube who supported my new player's journey through the game, who stuck with me even though I go at snail's pace and play other MMOs and talk about other MMOs and sometimes post different videos. You guys are so amazing. The amount of likes, subscribes, and comments that I get, tips in the comments about how I can improve, or what I did that was wrong, or like little tiny pieces of lore, they encouraged me to go further and further into the game, and I just fell more and more in love. Now, yes, it's a slow journey. The Realm Reborn story takes forever. Specifically, if you're someone who goes on to it with the mission of reading the text, of trying to get involved with the story, it's going to take you a really long time. And our story starts in a very traditional method of us riding on a weird cart in the middle of nowhere. This is where I could have done a transition into Skyrim, but I didn't do it for you guys, so there you go. But you are just a simple adventurer, right? That's how so many of these MMOs start, and I think it's such a, necessary part of the MMO journey. You are a simple adventurer who either becomes something greater or discovers that you are something greater. And I'd say this journey plays more to the second part there, where we discover stuff about ourselves, all while becoming a greater player as well. First off, you do go to one of 3 towns. When I first started, I thought everyone started at the same town because that's where I started. Not necessarily the case. I do like where I started, nice and wooden, woodland. Wooden, I don't know what that word is, but a nice woodland area with lots of trees and very typical nice foresty monsters. It's really what I would enjoy in a MMO when you start anyways. It's got a very nice nature vibe to it without being too different. And I think that was one of the more interesting parts about starting there, is that it felt like a normal MMO. It didn't feel any different. And that's kind of what I was very scared that Final Fantasy would feel. I felt like it was going to be something completely weird, that there was going to be a bunch of lore thrown at me that I didn't know. And yes, there were some name drops that I didn't really catch on to, or some big lore moments that I really didn't understand, such as flying through the sky and talking to a big crystal. That was kind of weird at first, but I did start learning more and more about how all these pieces played into one big narrative. So we get acquainted with our hometown, and mostly we were doing very basic quests, kind of get reputation with the town and help out, make a few bucks, make some XP, very typical MMO stuff. We do start getting more recognition with kind of the town leaders, who then send us to the other 2 main cities to meet with their leaders and discuss some of the bigger plot points, such as the Empire and some of their bad stuff that they've been doing. We do occasionally see this shadowy figure who will be later revealed to be La Habrea, and then also later revealed to be one of our friends, but we'll get into that confusion later on. And he kind of like meddles with us, but doesn't outright kill us. Very traditional evil guy who could probably kill us, but chooses to just like send creatures that are kind of difficult, but will probably kill, and just watch us from afar giggling. That's more his jive. But we meet all of the leaders and kind of build our reputation for everyone while doing that, which is a lot of fun. We do some dungeons for different cities, really get to know ourselves as a player. This is kind of the point in time where you'll start maybe experimenting with different classes and jobs in the game. This is kind of where I made my switch from archer to scholar and joined the heal life, which was pretty fun as well. So once completing some tasks for some of the other main cities' leaders, we do get some more notoriety with our own city, and we meet the leader, who is Kan-E Senna. I'm really sorry if I'm pronouncing that name wrong. I just have it written on a piece of paper. I'll have it on the screen too, so you guys can see who I'm talking about when I butcher their name. But they are the leader of my hometown, and they kind of start talking to us about these visions that we've been having, where we can see past events that are usually quite timely to the story that we're diving through at the time. And she calls them echoes, and says that because of that, the fact that we get those, it reminds her of the Warriors of the Light, which once again are the Warriors of Light. I'm sorry. I'm super sorry for all the wording of all this. I've got like a little sheet of like notes scribbled on here so I don't forget any key steps, but I might say weird stuff, and I apologize. I really do. But yeah, so she talks to us a bit about this. We save a girl in a main town, and this gets us sort of introduced to the Scions of the Seven Dawn, which is a club that really focuses specifically on people that have this echo ability, or at least the leader, Minfilia, does. And we are kind of like-minded people that are trying to make the world a better place, protect it from evil, be it the primals that we'll get into in a second, or later on the Empire, as that becomes kind of more the central plot later on in the story. So we initially work with the Scions to help defend the world against primals, the first one being Ifrit. There's a bit of a small story involving betrayal that happens there as well, but it's a smaller story step. And the bigger thing here that happens is that we don't get corrupted by Ifrit when he tries to consume our soul, because our soul is already spoken for by a beautiful crystal rock named Heidelin. She is the rock that we talk to in space, in our dreams, wherever you like to say. Whatever I choose to say is probably the wrong definition of where it is, but for simplicity, it looks like we're talking and floating in space. But she's already claimed our soul, so we can't be claimed, so we fight Ifrit and defeat him, which is awesome, and we get even more notoriety with the land. We go back to some of the main towns, and we're invited into a grand company, which is kind of like guilds in A Realm Reborn, or I guess in Final Fantasy XIV, but it's a NPC guild, and there's like 3 main factions. Guild Wars 2 has a similar situation with the different pacts that you can join. So we join the Maelstrom because their city is awesome and piratey, which is super cool, by the ocean. A little bit different. I liked it a lot. Different feel from all those trees. I was kind of getting bored of my wooded hometown and wanted to expand my horizons. That's my main reason for joining it. So it was a lot of fun that way. But then we do some missions with the Maelstrom people, and we meet some more adventurers. I think this is where we meet Biggs and Wedge, that are 2 pretty important characters who worked with a engineer called Sid, who becomes a very big character, and we'll get into that in just a second. But we meet Biggs and Wedge, and we do a little bit of missions with them. So one of the most enjoyable but also kind of difficult parts of the Realm Reborn story is that you're introduced to a lot of different people. And I think this does come into play with the fact that I haven't played Final Fantasy games really before, where there is probably a lot more character-driven stories. But there was a lot of people that I had to start remembering, and when they got brought back in later episodes, I had to be like, oh yeah, I know you, and this is why. So it got a little bit tricky that way. And I mentioned this when I meet Biggs and Wedge, because initially I thought they were just sort of NPCs that I might deal with just for this mission, and as it turns out, they became lifelong, or story-long friends that became a pretty big role later on in this journey. So it's very difficult to understand right away, how important certain characters are, and if you should remember them, and really stick to how they've helped you in the past and how they're going to help you in the future. So it's a little bit confusing that way. I think there's more characters in this story than there are in a lot of other MMO stories, but I do feel like that's also the strong point, because a lot of other MMO stories don't have enough characters to make it feel like a real world, whereas this one, I feel like there's all of these different groups that are trying to solve or destroy the world, and it's very much how the real world would handle these big problems. So it's kind of interesting in that regards as well. All right, so let me just take a look at my notepad here to see what happens after we join the Maelstrom. We helped Biggs, and then we meet these fairy folk that I think are called the Sylph. I hope that's correct. I wrote that down beside fairies, so maybe I wasn't crazy. But they talk really interestingly. So they say this one, blah, 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 and this one, blah, 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 which is very cool, kind of irritating eventually, but it's a fun new little way of talking for a bit. But we help them out, we get some reputation with them, and we end up finding their leader in a gross spider cave where La Habrea was up to no good. We confront him, have a little spooky talk with him in a different language, how you do, and we freed the fairy, which was good for us because the fairy's good. Cool. This all leads to us returning back to the fairyland and seeing how they're going to continue to live their lives. You'll also notice in the background that I'm trying to put the proper cutscenes whenever I'm talking about certain areas of the story. This is one of my favorite functions in A Realm Reborn. You can see all the cutscenes in your inn and play through them, which is just awesome, specifically for a game that is so story-driven. It's such a home run of a feature. It's really, really good. But if I do put the wrong screens at the wrong time slightly, I do apologize for that. I'm kind of jumping all over the place with my rendition of the story, and Yeah, it's what it is. But so we do help the fairies out, and then we kind of do a bit of investigating about La Habrea because he seems to be more of a menace than he was originally. But that's cut short because, hey, there's another primal. I believe this one's called Titan. I was confused at first if it was a Titan that we were fighting, but I think it's just a primal that's named Titan. But could be wrong about that. Sorry about that. We do end up killing him, which is cool. He's got a cool fire cave that we fight him in, which, you know, I liked a lot. And once we do kill him, though, we come back to our Scions clubhouse, and it's been ransacked. There are people dead. There's a fairy on the ground who's got like one last dying breath, and a lot of people are missing, which is really, really sad. Long story short, we lost all of our friends, and we are told to go to a church for answers. So we go to the church, we talk to the father there, and we also meet a masked stranger, or not masked, a hooded stranger, who turns out to be Sid, the long-lost engineer of the Enterprise, a spaceship or starship or flying ship, not Star Trek ship, though there are jokes about that, which I did appreciate in the story as well. But he, I believe, is a long-term character of the Final Fantasy universe, because I casually talked about him in one of these videos, and I was like, I wonder if he'll be a big character, and a lot of people were like, yeah, no, he's a pretty big character. So yeah, we meet Sid. He's got cool hair, cool goggles, you know him. And then we also kind of talk to Alphanode. I'm super sorry about it. His name's scary when you see it. And I know I've heard it like said in the game a few times, and I'm just trying. I don't know. He's pretty. He's a pretty guy, and he is friendly with me and Sid, and kind of helps Sid to regain some of his memories. And we kind of set out as a trio to rescue our crew that have been missing and continue to fight various primals. The first of which is Garuda, who is a sexual feathered beast creature that puts up quite a fight, but in the end we do kind of beat, but it's really the Empire who defeats her and absorbs not only her, but also the past two primals' energy into their ultimate weapon, which is like a big robot dragon. And this is kind of where the plot has been going at a slow pace, where we would be making random feasts for people and collecting bottles of wine, to like, oh hey, there's a world-ending ultimate weapon that we should probably pay attention. So dial went from like 2 to like 10 on the urgency scale, and it was an interesting cutscene. I think this is really where I was like taking it like a very casual story, and it was like, oh hey, something big's going on now, which was cool. So with the Enterprise back in hand, we do go and save the Scions who have been kept captive, and it looks like Thancred betrayed them because he was corrupted by La Habrea. This is kind of a beat that I kind of stepped over. And this is going to sound really, really stupid of me, but I thought the character models of La Habrea and Thancred just looked very similar, minus the mask, and that's just what they were doing, but it was actually the same person. And they do draw attention to this in the story. I must have just been zoned out or on my phone like a little fool when this was going on in the cutscenes. Even people who take this game super slow pace and try to enjoy the story apparently get distracted at times, and I super apologize for that story step, but people in the comments were rightly calling me out as soon as I didn't mention it, so there you go. But apologies are given right here, right now. So we reunite with the Scions, at which point we talk to the Grand Companies who were considering surrender, and we're like, no, let's not surrender. Let's at least die or be victorious, but we're not surrendering. So we rally them, and they decide to fight as well. And we take the fight to the Empire through 2 very long, very cutscene heavy dungeons that were lots of fun. They are kind of some of the most recent videos I've done on the channel, so if you want a little bit more of an in-depth dive on those, and really anything, you can just check out the playlist. I'm sure I've done a video about it. I mean, it's been, I don't know, quite the journey. It was like 10 months and 57 videos, like, ugh. It was quite the journey. But we do end up defeating the ultimate weapon, defeating Gaius, and defeating La Habrea in a fight at the very end. and have a cutscene where we do purify Thancred from the corruption of La Habrea as well. I haven't continued on much past that with the story, so I'm not entirely sure how much of a player Thancred is like afterwards, or if he like is still kind of like sick from this, or what the story is with that. But I've been told that we do cure his corruption when we break that crystal around his neck. So yeah, there you go. That's the long and the short of it. Wow, so I just realized this did turn into, more than anything, a all over the place, quick, rushed summary more than anything with a few of my thoughts, but I probably should have known that that's how this was going to turn out. Overall, the story has slow pieces to it for sure. There's a lot of quests just to build up your reputation and build feasts for people and sort of talk to people. And there's a lot of cutscenes, some of them that are voiced, but weirdly some of them with the same characters that aren't voiced. So there's definitely some issues there, but there are some really good story steps. I feel like everything that I mentioned were more key story steps, and story steps that I either took note of and really thought were important, or that I had missed and players really said, hey, this was a key story step as well. And I think together it builds quite an interesting story. The other part that I kind of didn't mention is that we were collecting these crystals throughout the whole thing, of different elements, and I was kind of confused by what they were going to be used for, but there was definitely, it involved Hydaelyn, the crystal in the sky, and she had sort of these specific places where we would put each of the crystals, and it was definitely like there's a set amount that we needed to collect of different colors. And I was very confused for a long time what we were going to do with them, but it did come into play in the last cutscene with La Habrea, where we do end up using them to create a weapon of light, which helps us defeat him. Though ultimately, what I really enjoyed about that cutscene with La Habrea is that it wasn't just us. It was all of the Warriors of Light. There were too many for him. We can see all of our NPC friends, and then at some point all of the other lights going across the screen, which I can assume is meant to be the multiple player characters that are doing this journey and banding together to ultimately be victorious and defeat the shadowy masked creep. Well, there you go. That was, like, it's a significant story for sure. Yes, I played it very slowly. I could have done it a lot quicker if I was focused on purely grinding through it, or even if I was just only playing Final Fantasy XIV as my standalone MMORPG. Yeah, I could have made it through it quicker, but I had a lot of fun doing it at the pace I wanted to. I never felt like it was a chore, and I always enjoyed going in and seeing what the next step of the story was going to be, even when it was kind of the more tedious or mundane pieces to the story. The most exciting part, I think, for me is that this story is notably one of the worst compared to some of the expansion stories that I get to do moving forward. Now, there are a bunch of in-between quests that I have to look forward to as well, and I'm sure there will be some videos about that coming up quite soon. But for the moment being, I've really enjoyed my time in Final Fantasy XIV, and I truly do look forward to continuing with the story. Once again, I wanted to set some time aside to thank each and every one of you who's given me a tip, a piece of advice, or corrected me in the comments throughout this journey. Even if I don't reply to your comments every single time, I do read most of them, as many as I can. I try and scroll through as many as I can and read them all, and I try and reply to them, but they do mean so much, and they've helped us grow as a community so much, which I think is so enjoyable. The amount of times I get people private messaging me about joining this game and whether or not they think it's worth it, the number one thing I say is, hey, the community is so welcoming to new players. You'll definitely find people to play with, which is just such a fun thing to say about an MMORPG. But yeah, guys, thanks for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed this. If you did, toss it a like. If you're new to our community, please consider subscribing and joining us for the rest of the journey. Thank you, and have a wonderful rest of your day.